Welcome to BIA Media, Canada's top black media provider. Whether you're looking for content on fashion, art, music, or simple lifestyle, we bring you the best the black community in Ottawa has to offer and so much more. And better yet, do you have a project you need help with? Well, look no further. We provide equipment, studio, and office space, as well as a team of dedicated individuals to help you bring those ideas to life. So don't wait. Check out our new website at biamedia.ca for more information on how to contact us and start creating today. BIA Media, your way.
Okay, everyone, good morning. Welcome to our sixth session on What History Class Left Out, Part 1, African History from 10,000 BCE to 711. I am still in Jamaica. We're leaving on Monday. So next week, our class will look as, it normally does. We'll be back in the studio, but we will continue. So today will be very similar to last week in that I will begin class talking about a few things live, and then I will play the lecture. We'll stop in the middle, for Q&A. I'll play the rest of the lecture, and then we will have open discussion as usual at the end. So that's how we'll go today. A couple of things I want to say as we get started. One, today is August 17th, and it is the 134th, it would have been the 134th birthday of Marcus Garvey. And it's really important for us to recognize that, not only because I'm in Jamaica right now, but just, I don't think there is an African person in the 20th century more influential, individually influential than Marcus Mosiah Garvey. The Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey is one of the national heroes of Jamaica, but more importantly, he's one of the heroes of African people. No organization has ever existed, possibly with the exception of maybe the AME Church, that has had such a global impact on African people, that was started by African people themselves. Then Marcus Garvey's and Amy Ashwood Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Community Leagues, which was founded right here in Jamaica in 1914, so 110 years ago. That organization would then grow when Garvey migrated to Harlem, New York, into an organization that included something like 6 million African people at its height. Chapters all over the African world, in the Caribbean and South America and North America and Europe, and underground in Africa, because you have to remember, in the 19-teens, 1920s, Africa's under colonization. So Garvey's organization was, because Garvey was arguing for an end to colonization and Africa for the Africans, at home and abroad. He wanted Africa to be the place of great African government that could protect the interests of African people wherever they were in the world. And Garvey's organizational prowess, the writing, the speeches that he gave, really influenced people that would never even meet him. Folks like Nnamdi Azikiwe, Kwame Nkrumah, Jomo Kenyatta, folks on the continent. It would influence the parents of Malcolm X, and would then go on to influence Malcolm himself, and even the Nation of Islam. I think it was believed that Elijah Poole, who becomes Elijah Muhammad, was a Garveyite, and many of his early followers were Garveyites. The union movement in Canada among the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, heavily influenced by the Garvey movement. One of the great chapters was in Montreal. Of course, that's where Malcolm's parents met, and all over the place. So we can never downgrade the significance of Marcus Garvey, and his birthday is a good day to remember that. The reason why I'm actually, on a personal note, the reason why we're here in Jamaica with my family, my wife's grandmother turned 98 yesterday. So we're actually here celebrating her birthday. So she turned 98 yesterday, and Garvey would have been 134 if he was still with us. So wanted to start by talking about that. But today's lesson is actually about the Bantu migrations. This was a period that lasted from around 2000 BC, and we'll talk about this, to around 1000 BC, so about a 3,000-year period where you have this movement of Africans that starts in eastern Nigeria, western Cameroon, and extends all the way through to the east coast of Africa, down to the southern coast of Africa. So we're going to talk about that today. You're going to learn the lecture. But as always, I want to present you with some new information. Well, it's not entirely new, maybe the past couple of years, but recent historical and archaeological evidence about this time period. So you can see how this evidence goes. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Rob. Yeah, definitely inspired Marley. Garvey is considered one of the prophets of Rastafarianism. He had said in either the late 20s or in 1930 that look to the east, and when an African king is crowned, then you'll know liberation is at hand. Garvey said something to that effect. I'm paraphrasing. And Rastafarians, or people that will become Rastafarians, looked at the crowning of Haile Selassie in Ethiopia as this event, and then built their entire theology around that. So Garvey is considered in high regard by Rastafarians, almost as like a John the Baptist type figure of proclaiming this African king before it happened, before Selassie was crowned. So really, really influential, and that we could do an entire course on Garvey. I always mention him in our early history, the African Renaissance course, and others. We'll talk extensively about the Garvey organization in September when we have our seminar on snitches and sellouts, because one of the reasons why the organization wasn't as big as it was and Garvey was persecuted the way that he was is because of snitches and sellouts. And we'll talk about that in our next seminar, which starts in a couple of weeks in September. All right, so let me show you some recent information that I want to share before we get into the lecture. So I want you just to take a look at this, and I'm going to put these on the course website, but this is an article that came out, I think this is 2018, March 2018, so 5 years ago. But early anthropogenic impact on Western Central African rainforest 2,600 years ago. 2,600 years ago. And you'll notice all of these scholars that are here, all of these scholars. So this was an article done by a team of scientists, most of them based in Europe. So you see Germany, you got some people that are there actually representing Cameroon, which is good. Some folks representing Gabon. So you have a team of scientists, some African, some European. And what they did, I'm just going to read the abstract because it tells us the type of evidence that's being collected to help us reconstruct African history. And it says, a potential human footprint on Western Central African rainforests before the Common Era has become the focus of an ongoing controversy. Between 3,000 years ago and 2,000 years ago, regional pollen sequences indicate a replacement of mature rainforests by a forest savanna mosaic, including pioneer trees. Although some studies suggest an anthropogenic influence on this forest fragmentation, current interpretations based on pollen data attribute the rainforest crisis to climate change toward a drier, more seasonal climate. I just want to stop there. So what these folks are doing, they are using pollen, the residue of pollen that has been preserved, and they're able to analyze that pollen to figure out what type of plant life existed in the area at the time. And they can take this and use all types of scientific techniques. They said, we resolve this controversy through the continuous 10,000-year record of both vegetation and hydrological changes from Lake Borumbi in Southwest Cameroon, based on changes in carbon and hydrogen isotope compositions in plant waxes. sea infrared vegetation changes confirm a prominent and abrupt appearance of C4 plants in Lake Barambri catchment at 2600 calendar years before 1950, followed by an equally sudden return to rainforest vegetation. Our findings suggest, I'm just skipping to the end, our findings suggest that technological developments, including the agricultural practices in iron metallurgy, possibly related to the large-scale Bantu expansion, significantly impacted the ecosystems before the Common Era. So again, all these big words, all this scientific jargon, essentially what they're saying is they're using pollen and the residue of pollen in plant waxes, and they're looking for carbon isotopes because it can tell you what types of plants were in the area to show that human beings were influencing this environment. And they're influencing it through their technological advancements. They're using iron tools to change the environment, to plant different things, to change it from rainforest to more savanna. And then ultimately, if they leave, if they move on, it changes back to rainforest. But we can see the human interference and possibly talk about the types of tools and the types of communities that lived in this region, what they were eating, what they were growing, how they were cultivating, the size of the area that they were cultivating. So really important information. And again, there are no written records from this period in Cameroon. So the only way that we can talk about what human beings were doing is by doing research such as this. This is what Joe wanted us to do. This is the type of research. And even back in his day, they weren't doing this in the 70s and 80s. These are relatively new scientific approaches to the reconstruction of African history. So I just wanted to show this one. And one more before I get into the lecture. This is from 2 years ago, Moving Histories, Bantu Language Expansions, Eclectic Economies and Mobilities, done by 3 authors, including Jan Vansina, who is probably the historian in the second half of the 20th century that's done the most on Central African history. I don't think there's anyone that has written or published as much on Central Africa as Jan Vansina. But this, I'll just read the abstract again. This essay interprets a classification of Africa's Bantu languages, which used statistical tools guided by assumptions about farming and its chronology to analyze fresh vocabulary evidence. It shows appealing movement from Cameroon's grass fields into southern Cameroon, then along a savanna corridor through West Central Africa's rainforest into the savannas, then into southern Africa, the Great Lakes, and the Indian Ocean coast. A clear sequence of movement masked methodological and historical factors. Language death, multilingualism, and the limits of vocabulary evidence restrain the classification's authority. Transformations from food collecting to food producing, or from no metals to full engagement with metals, were mutable, unfolded at different speeds, and involved interactions with first comers. In Central Africa, Bantu speakers were often the first farmers and metal users in the region, but elsewhere, they were commonly neither. Their arrival did not immediately displace first comers. Computational methods can accommodate many of these issues. So what they're doing in this, they're using language and vocabulary to show the movement of people and how people interacted. So what they're arguing is the previous belief was that when Bantu speakers came into Eastern and Southern Africa, they were the ones that brought farming. They were the ones that brought metallurgy, or the use of iron tools, into regions. But through evaluating vocabularies and linguistic evidence, they figured out that that wasn't always the case when they moved into a new territory. Sometimes farming was already present, sometimes metallurgy was already present, based on the words that are being used. So what they're able to do is they can look at a language and they can say, this is the word for iron. Is it a Bantu word, or is it a word that is different? That's something more akin to something that was present before the Bantus already came. And you can tell even the words for farming, or the words for particular crops or activities associated with farming, or tools associated with farming. So you can combine articles such as this, which is looking at linguistic evidence, with articles that are dealing with crop analysis or pollen analysis, combine that with archaeology, traditional archaeology that deals with pottery and the remnants of tools and those types of things, and you combine, and then take oral history and check that with all of this, and you get a very clear picture of what was going on in Africa. But you can't get it from one of these methods alone. You can't get a full picture of African history during this time with just the linguistic evidence. You can't get a full picture with just the archaeological evidence, or just the botanical evidence, or just the oral history. You have to combine all of those methods together to really get a good snapshot of what's going on, to clear up controversies, to make sure that you're really talking about the history the way it needs to be talked about. Again, part of this class is not just to say, this is what happened, this is what went down. That's part of it. The other thing that I really want to point out is how we find this evidence. What are the actual tools being used to reconstruct African history? Because this way, when you're listening to other lectures and you're reading other things, you'll be able to have a better appreciation of this evidence. So that way people just can't come to you with claims about what Africans did or what they didn't do, but then they don't present their evidence. And you'll have a more skeptical and critical eye. So that's really, really important. So I just wanted to mention those two. They'll be on the course website, and you can read them if you really want to go into this yourself. You can read it to see what they say. I'm going to jump into the lecture now, and then we will pause in the middle for discussion.
Movements of people in world history. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about the history behind it and the archaeological evidence and linguistic evidence and oral history that we have connected to this topic. And then, in addition, you will get to see a preview of some of the work done by the summer teaching apprentices in the Coppin African Teachers Institute. And I'll explain more about what that is after we come back from our first break. So as always, these sessions are recorded. The first part, I will lecture for 25 minutes, then we'll have a Q&A. Then we'll come back, you'll hear from the teaching apprentices, and then I'll lecture a little bit more, then we'll call it a day. Then we turn the recording off and we have general discussion about things that folks are interested in. So if you remember from last week we talked about the, here we go. We talked about the importance of archaeology, and we were talking about ancient West African history and how we can learn a lot from the archaeological record. Part of the importance of this period in West African history was the creation of new techniques for iron smelting and iron forging. This was when West Africa entered the Iron Age, and we talked about the importance of iron. That technology is going to spread from West Africa to Central Africa, South Africa, and East Africa during the Bantu migrations. And we know about this from the archaeological record. So the time period that we're going to talk about today is actually incredibly vast, because the Bantu migrations start actually when this, off of this timeline, around 3000 BCE. Actually, no, because we have Norman here. So around the beginning of this timeline, all the way up to about 1000 CE is when the bulk of these migrations happened. It wasn't one migration. There were multiple stops and fits and goes of this group of people. And this is the time period that we're talking about. But for today's lecture, we're going to spend most of our time around here, from around 0 to around 500 CE, that period. Because this is when the Iron Age really takes off and really transforms political, economic, and social relations throughout Central, South, and East Africa. But there were people in this region of Africa before the Bantu migrations. And we know that from archaeological evidence, linguistic evidence, and oral history. The mask you see here is from the Kuba Kingdom, which was in northern Congo. This mask is now in, I think this one is in the collection of Yale University, because a lot of our artwork is in places that aren't in Africa, but that's starting to change. And it's called a Boum mask. A Boum mask. Boum masks were used in the Kuba Kingdom various times, various festivals, various initiation ceremonies, and it represented the original inhabitants of the region. Because although the political dominance of this kingdom that was in the Congo was done by Bantu-speaking people. So when we talk about the Bantu migrations, we're talking about migrations of people that speak Bantu languages and how they spread throughout Central, Southern, and East Africa. But this mask represents the people that were originally there. Before the Bantus came, they didn't migrate into an empty space. We have the history of the Twa people, the Batwa. These are what anthropologists, historians, and others erroneously call pygmies. We don't use that word pygmy because it's derogatory. A lot of the words that are used to describe African people and African culture are relatively derogatory. So we're moving away from that. So the Twa people of shorter stature that lived in the forested areas of Central Africa and Eastern Africa before the arrival of the Bantu. And one of the things that we'll get into today is what makes this migration so special. It's not just how vast the area that was covered and the cultural exchanges that happened, but the fact that it was done in a relatively peaceful manner. Unlike other migrations, human migrations throughout history, we can look at recent migrations of Europeans and others into the Americas and the destruction that wrought on the indigenous populations. You don't have evidence of that in Africa. You don't have evidence of that in the Bantu migrations. What you have are people coming together, exchanging cultures, exchanging ideas. And for much of the time, there was a lot of respect for the original inhabitants of the place, and they stayed in those areas. So since the Twa people were already there, the Bantu kingdoms and polities that arose in Central, Southern, East Africa, particularly Central and East Africa, recognized them as the original inhabitants of the land. And this mask represents those people, at least for the Kuba kingdom. So the evidence that we're relying upon, genetic evidence. We haven't really talked about genetics too much in this. I think the first week 1 we did, when we talked about early human civilizations in Africa, but genetic evidence. Studies have been done on people that live as far east as Kenya, as far west as Gabon, as far south as South Africa, and everything in the middle that tested people's genetics. And we found strong traces of particular genes associated with Bantu people. So we can actually trace the movement of Bantu people through genetics, and they're intermixing with Twa people, with Khoisan people, with other indigenous folks that lived in Central, South, and East Africa before the coming of the Bantu. So we can use genetic information to trace that movement. Of course, archaeological evidence, because one of the things that facilitated this movement of people was the adoption of iron technology. Iron leaves behind a lot of archaeological evidence from, of course, iron tools. So if we have weapons, or if we have farming utensils made out of iron, we can still have those. The production of iron takes place in furnaces, and there's bellows, and there's charcoal residue, and the other refuge that's left behind from the iron producing process. So we have all of that archaeological evidence. Pottery. We talked about pottery last week when I smashed the plate. So we have a lot of that. Linguistic evidence, which we'll talk about. The Bantu language family is one of the largest, it's the largest language family in Africa, and one of the largest language families in the world. Hundreds of other languages are associated with Bantu language, and they share a lot of similarities. So we can, again, trace the movement of people through linguistic evidence. Paleo-vegetation studies, what people were eating and how they were growing food, tells us a lot about the movement of people. Oral history can't take us back really far, but it gives us an understanding of how people understood this movement and how their culture was interpreted, even if it's for a modern time. What I mean by that is a lot of oral history tries to explain modern things. So oral history is used to explain the relationship between peoples, between, let's say, the Twa people and the Bantu kingdom, or between the Twa people and the Khoisan people in Southern Africa. Oral history is used to explain why people move to a particular area. And we can connect that with the archaeological evidence and make some historical hypotheses based off of that. And then a limited amount of information, particularly for this time period, comes from the written record. The Greeks talk about their interactions with the Bantu people in East Africa. We'll talk about that text. There is a ancient Egyptian text that talks about the Twa people, because there were interactions between the Twa people and the ancient Egyptians. The Twa people, just like during the time of the Koba Kingdom, which is thousands of years later, the ancient Egyptians understood that the Twa people were some of the oldest human populations. Even though they didn't have this evidence to prove that, they somehow knew that, and they honored the Twa people and brought them to Egypt, and as representatives of that early part of human history. And there is some Roman material about East Africa that we can rely on. Again, not a lot, but it exists. So again, the people that the Bantus came in contact with in the rainforest of Central Africa, we got the Ba. Ba, when you see Ba in Bantu language, that means people. So we see Ba in front of something, Ba is the name, Ba means people, and then the next word is the name. So we're talking about the Twa people, the Ba Twa, the Ba Mbuti. So the Mbuti people, again, the Mbuti are more Western forest dwellers, small in stature, that lived in the rainforest of Central Africa. The Twa, a little bit more toward the east, very similar in their cultures, very similar in their material cultures. They were masters of the forest. They could create poison strong enough to take down elephants. They were masters at net technology to trap prey, to trap food. They were hunters, they were gatherers. They lived in really egalitarian societies, meaning women and men shared political and economic and religious rights equally. Very equal societies, lived off the land, looked at the earth as a womb in their culture. So they were, as a womb nourishes a baby in a woman's body, the earth nourished their community. So the earth was seen as a womb, and it's a spiritual feature in and of itself. A lot of indigenous people around the world share this understanding of their relationship with the earth. It's not one of exploitation, it's one of spiritual respect for the earth, and these folks had it. Further south, the folks that the Bantu would come in contact with in Southern Africa are the Khoisan people. Again, another very ancient human population that we talked about at the beginning of the class. Very similar to the Batwa, except they're not short, but they live in various areas, but more desert areas, more savanna areas of Southern Africa, and developed a hunting gathering lifestyle. And there are people among these groups that in 2022 still live lifestyles very similar to this, and are fighting to maintain that existence against forces that are trying to, quote unquote, modernize them, which we really have to question, because what does that really mean? And is modern actually better? With how much destruction we've done to the planet, how much destruction we've done to each other, we should question that. But anyway, these were the folks that the Bantu came in contact with as they made these various migrations that started from Eastern Nigeria, Western Cameroon. Those are the modern political areas where this migration started from. Now, we don't know the exact reason as to why they left this area, but there is a number of hypotheses as to why. One, population growth. Because of what we talked about last week, the advancements that were made in Western Africa around the last few centuries before the Common Era and into the Common Era, farming techniques were advanced, iron technology was advanced, so you have more population. With more people, you got more pressure on the land, and you have more interpersonal conflict. So people moved. People say, I don't like the king anymore, or I don't like the chief anymore. I don't like how he's handling things. So instead of arguing and fighting over it, we'll just move. And this is reflected in a lot of the oral history. People said we moved because we had conflict with so-and-so and so-and-so. So this family or this group of families decided to move on, start up another place. They took their iron technology, they took their farming techniques, and they moved to another area. Another reason could be climate change. So farming became untenable in some areas and people had to move. Iron ore is not an inexhaustible source. So if you're an iron producing community and you use iron a lot, you can exhaust the iron ore in the region. So you have to go find more iron ore. So that's another reason why people will move. So this is the general direction that these migrations took place. One, along the savanna area north of the rainforest connected to the Congo River. So people moved along this grassy area, they farmed, and then they picked up some other techniques, which we'll talk about in a second. And then another group of people went straight into the rainforest. They followed the rivers and went straight into the rainforest. They combined their farming with fishing and other techniques. They formed symbiotic relationships with the Batwa, meaning they would farm, they would create iron tools, they would share those with the Batwa, and the Batwa would give them the products of the forest, honey, animal skins, luxury items from the forest. So you had those interactions, and then they would go down. But we'll go back to this map in a second. I want to go to this. This is from 2200 BCE, and it comes from Egypt. And this is one of the first pieces of written history on the Batwa. Although this says pygmy, this is because it was translated by some European a couple of decades ago. But the pharaoh writes to one of his officials who tells him about this trading expedition that he had, probably to Nubia. And he says, "Come northward to the residence immediately. Leave everything and bring this pygmy with thee, which thou hast brought living, prosperous, and healthy from the land of Akito." And we're not really sure where that is. For dances of the god, to rejoice and gladden the heart of the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Neferkari. May he live forever. So that's the name of the pharaoh. When he, the pygmy, goes down to the vessel, appoint trusty people who shall be about him on each side of the vessel. Take care lest he fall into the water. When he sleeps at night, appoint again trusty people who shall sleep about him in his tent. Inspect 10 times a night. My majesty desires to see this pygmy more than the produce of Sinai and Punet. If thou arrivest at the residence, this pygmy being with thee alive, prosperous, and healthy, my majesty will do for thee a greater thing than that which has been done for the treasurer of the god Werjej Deba in the time of Essie, in accordance with the heart's desire of my majesty to see this pygmy. This is how important this Batwa performer was to the pharaoh. He's like, I need everybody to watch this guy, make sure he don't fall off the boat, make sure he's taken care of, because I want to see this Twa performer come to ancient Egypt. And so this was written over 4,000 years ago. How much respect even the pharaoh had for these performers, these Twa performers that were coming from Central Africa. So it's very interesting. And you can see where this connection probably happened. The Twa people start to live here. We see, this is an old map. So it says Republic of Zaire, but this is DRC. So they're living here. Egypt had relationships with Nubia. So he probably traveled, or was connected with Nubia, was probably connected with Ethiopia. He came up the Nile, and when the pharaoh heard about him, he wanted him to come north to Egypt so that the pharaoh could see this performer dance for the gods. Because again, the ancient Egyptians realized somehow that the Twa people were very early human civilizations and had a very intimate connection to the earth, therefore an intimate connection to spirituality. So when they talk about the dance of the gods that this Twa person was going to be doing, it's very spiritually significant for the pharaoh to see that. All right, so early evidence. Again, as this migration went, making its way through Central Africa, and you see it's not a straight line. The two first branches come, they interact, they form communities, they form kingdoms. Some people settle down, some people keep moving, again, for those same type of issues. Interpersonal conflict, I don't like what the chief is doing. Me and my family, we're going to go move over here, take our farming tools, take this, what we've learned, move on. Population gets too big in a particular place because we're being so successful growing yams and growing millet and sorghum and all these different things that we're growing and creating, that the population gets so big that we got to move. We got to move. We got to find more places to live. So this group continued to go. Then they split up and went different places until eventually, between 0 In 1000 CE, the people that started out in Nigeria, Cameroon area have now migrated, taking their language, their culture, which has changed over time. It didn't stay the same as it was in the origin point. It's morphed, but the language is pretty much still the same, or it still has some root words that we can trace linguistically to tell this is these are connected group of people. So we have professors like Shadrach Chirikure out of the University of Oxford, who does archaeology in Zimbabwe, which is one of the more southern points of this migration. So Zimbabwe is here. And he has shown that as the Bantus moved into Zimbabwe, they created civilizations like Great Zimbabwe and the Great Enclosure in Zimbabwe. So this was built a little bit after our time period, because our class stops at 711 CE. This was built between 900 CE and all the way up to about 1200 CE. They were still building this and adding things to it. This is one of the largest stone structures in the world, and it's actually 3 different sites. But his archaeology has shown that even before these massive buildings were constructed, you had people living there, farming there, and they were Bantu speakers. We know that from the archaeological record, from the pottery, and the oral history, and the language that is spoken there among the Shona people today, because these are the ancestors of the Shona people that live in Zimbabwe. And he, like many other African archaeologists, had to do a lot of work in the late 20th century, because when this was first, quote unquote, discovered by white Europeans, they said, oh yeah, a great race of white people built this structure and then left Africa. Literally, that's what was said in these history books. So you had African archaeologists and, truthful white archaeologists come along and say, no, that's not true. These things were actually built by Bantu-speaking folks that had migrated into the area as farmers, as traders, as iron workers, so on and so forth. In East Africa, you have archaeologists like Dr. Freda Mbogore, who works out of, where's she at? The British Institute of Eastern Africa. But she used to be the director of she was in charge of antiquities for Kenya at some point as well. But she's also the president of the Pan-African Archaeological Association. And I bring these people up because I want to highlight people that look like us that are doing this type of work at preserving our history, because it's important work. It's key for us to do the Sankofa right. And she writes books on humans and the environment. She has another book that came out, I think in 2015. Yeah, 2015, Population and Ceramic Traditions, Revisiting the Tana Ware of Coastal Kenya. And this starts in our time period, right when our course ends, around 711. Again, these are all Bantu-speaking populations that these folks are studying in East Africa and in Southern Africa. The archaeologists also work in tandem with the linguistic specialists that do things like, and this is a big word, so if you're at a family gathering and you want to impress somebody, you want to say, hey, you ever heard about glottochronology? Glottochronology. This will make you sound real smart, especially if you're coming back from college or something like that. You want to show your people that you know what you're talking about. All it is the study of the rate of change of vocabulary in a language. So this can be used by linguists to look at how people migrated, how they interacted, and how they exchanged words, and how those words changed over time. And they can tell us where people came from, how long they've been interacting with each other, who was the dominant group, so on and so forth. Because when we go back to, when you look at this map, everything in orange are Bantu languages. Niger Congo B is what they're classified in by linguistics. So you see the language dispersal throughout Africa. So there's Nilo-Saharan languages that folks around Lake Chad and other places in North Central Africa speak, and even in this part of East Africa. You have the original Niger Congo languages before the dispersal. So everything in West Africa all the way up until really Wolof is kind of on this border between Afro-Asiatic and the Niger Congo languages. But what they speak in Guinea and Liberia and Sierra Leone and Ghana, Nigeria, these are the original Niger Congo languages. When the Bantu migration happens, Folks from this region spread the Bantu language throughout this entire orange area. But when they do, they also adopt some vocabulary from the Khoisan people, from the Twa people, so you see those interactions. Madagascar is a whole nother situation of itself because they speak a language very similar to what's spoken by the indigenous people of Australia, people in Malaysia and other places, because the migration from Madagascar actually came from the east to west, as opposed to west to east. So we got these language families. So within the Bantu, again, there's hundreds of languages that share common vocabulary, that express a shared common original culture. Now that culture morphed and changed as it went to different places, like all cultures do, because all cultures change. But there are some key things that I'll talk about at the end of this class that unite Bantu culture and Bantu language. All right. So just to give you a scope of the size of this migration, because this is another thing I like to point out when I talk about the Bantu migrations, is the actual size of Africa, because most maps don't really show it the way it express it the way it should be. This is a map of the United States. The United States can fit inside of Africa like 3 times with space left over. You can fit the United States, all of Western Europe, all of Eastern Europe, India, China, Japan, and the UK, all inside of Africa with room to spare. This is how big Africa is. So when we talk about this migration that took place between 3000 BCE, 1000 CE, those 4,000 years, those people made it a long way. And even today, there's only about 1 billion and something people in Africa. Africa is still not densely populated for the amount of territory that's in Africa. So it's just something to think about when we talk about the scope of this and the amount of ethnic groups and nations that were created as a result of this migration. All right, so what happened when these folks interacted with each other, when we start to see this migration? Just a quick chart. Things that they shared, they intermarried. So the Twa people intermarried with the Bantu, the Khoisan people intermarried with the Bantus. They exchanged terms, like I said, their languages start to things. The Khoisan people are known for the click in their language. If you listen to Southern Africans, there's that click thing. That became incorporated into a lot of the Bantu languages. So, for example, Zulu is a Bantu language. It's classified as a Bantu language, but it has elements of Khoisan language in it. This is in Southern Africa. Among certain languages in Central Africa, there are Twa words, particularly for things going on in the forest, that the Bantus adopted into their language. So we got exchange of terms. They formed symbiotic economic social relations, which I mentioned before. So the forest people provide forest goods, the farmers will provide farming goods. So the Bantus provide farming goods. The Bantus speakers about agriculture. Some of them became herders, and this becomes incredibly important. I'll go back to this point in a second. They produced ceramics, which we talked about last week, forged and smelted iron. They had higher birth rates, and they were more socially stratified. And they came from places with chiefs and initiated men's groups, women's groups, this type of thing, whereas the indigenous people were much more socially equal. They were foragers and hunters. They were more mobile communities. These were more sedentary. Now, although we're talking about migrations, people weren't moving all the time. That's a 4,000-year process. Some people would settle down and they would stay there until there was social conflict or environmental conflict, and then they would move. But that's over generations. These were pretty much settled societies, whereas the indigenous people, whether it's the Khoisan or the Twa, they were much more mobile. You know, they would follow animals. They would follow the season. They would set up camps and move at different times. So much more mobile. Loosely centralized. They relied on stone tools. Some horticulture, I mean, they had gardens, but not agriculture, not farms. In the communities, some communities produced ceramics, but very few. Most of them didn't have ceramics. So these are the differences between the groups that came and the groups that were already there. Now, going back to this discussion on herding, and then we'll take a break. This segment of the Bantus, when they get to this area here, on the fringes of, so remember, the one group goes straight into the rainforest. One group is on the fringes of the rainforest, which is a savanna area. As they get further east, they're interacting with Africans that are already in this region. So we're talking about Sudan, Ethiopia, Kenya, and they adopt animal herding. They didn't have that in Nigeria and Cameroon. They were mostly farmers. They were mostly forest people here in Nigeria and Cameroon that developed farming and iron technology. But once they get to the east, then they start to adopt animal herding as well. So this group of the Bantu migration, this wave, they have a mixed economy, farming and animal herding. So when they start to spread further south, they spread rapidly because they have multiple forms of economic diversity, as opposed to the group on with the Eastern world, with Indonesia, with Malaysia, and even as far east as China. And this East African region becomes interconnected with global trade. We'll talk about this more in part 2 of this class when it really comes up. But the goods that come into Africa change things as well. When the banana crop comes into Africa, because bananas aren't indigenous to Africa, bananas, plantains, those types of things, that changes things in the Great Lake regions for the Bantus that migrate here, and other crops that come in. So, but we'll talk about that in a few months when we do part 2 of this class. All right, with that being said, we'll take a break. I talked about iron already. We'll take a break, and then I'll introduce you to some teaching apprentices. So any questions in the chat, Daniel, or does anyone have any?
All right. Well,
I'm going to have to drop off. Daniel is going to run the Q&A, and Daniel will also start the second half of the questions. So Daniel, if there's any questions that you can answer, please write them down and I'll address them next week. Okay?
all right, sounds good. Mr. Francis, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. During the Bantu migration, what mode of transportation was used? I'm just wondering whether or not this was all on foot. Were there movement across rivers, like using some form of flotation? And the second part of my question is that how were the migrants received by indigenous people in the areas into which they were migrating?
That's a great question. So to answer the first one, there was lots of movement on foot, but yes, Africans are a riverine people as well. So there was also the usage of canoes, the usage of boats, things of that nature. With regards to how the migrants were received, that is a question I would have to write down for next week. I would say that there would have been some level of conflict with regards to the people whose territories they were moving in with. At the same time, there is a tendency for anthropologists to exaggerate the extent to which there was conflict. There was lots of intermarriages, lots of unions as well. So I would say it was 50-50, but I can write that question down for next week as well.
Thank you very much, Daniel.
Any other questions? Okay, well, if there's no more questions, I will go ahead and play the video back up. All right, sorry about that. Let me turn the sound on so that everybody can hear.
Click.
Oh, go back. I'm not sure which one.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's there actually.
Okay, that's the one that.
But worst comes to worst, I can also present this one as well. It's totally fine. So yeah, so this is my presentation of riches of the Kingdom of Congo. So we're just going to go through it briefly, and I also put a few pop quiz. If you guys want to participate, that's totally fine, and if not, it's fine as well. Depends on how comfortable you guys feel. So for this presentation, we're going to start prior to the Portuguese arrival. So before we even talk about that, I just want to briefly explain how Congo used to be known as the Kingdom of Congo, and it was actually Congo with a K and not a C. But after colonization and everything, like they changed the K to a C. So yeah, so prior to the arrival of the Portuguese, the kingdom would melt copper and gold, and they were also very large into the trading business. So they had large commercial network. And the common trades that they would do, they would often trade copper and ivory, and also raffia cloth and pottery. And now a few political rules that they used to have was that the kingdom had 12 provinces, and those 12 provinces had 12 governors as well. And whenever a king would die, there were 12 counselors that would gather, and they would have to pick a new king. And sometimes it would take months and even years before that decision could be made. And the name that they used to have for a king was Mani or Ne. And that was to also designate a person with authority. So for the kingdom expansion, so the Kingdom of Congo was one of the largest kingdom in Africa, and they didn't really have any military army per se. However, they had strong men who were chosen to protect women and children and also the elderly. And other kingdoms had become a part of the Kingdom of Congo. And as long as they followed their laws, they were allowed to also become a part of the Kingdom of Congo. So that's kind of how they grew as well. And provinces were allowed to leave the kingdom however they pleased, and there wasn't any opposition from the central government. So in other words, it was pretty much laid back, and that also kind of revealed a lack of resistance in the kingdom, and that's how more provinces began to separate. So now a little pop quiz for those who want to participate. So just to test a bit of your attention span. So this is a bit of a fill in the blank. So for the political rules, whenever a king died, how many counselors would gather? So we're just going to start off with that. How many counselors would gather?
12.
I'm sorry?
12.
12, exactly. So yeah, 12 counselors would gather. And what would they gather for? So to fill in the blank.
To select a new king.
Exactly. So to pick a new king. So blank and blank would pass when choosing a new king. So what would pass?
Months or even years.
Exactly. So months or even years would pass before they select a new king. And now we'll talk about the kingdom expansion. So the kingdom of Congo was one of the blank kingdoms.
Largest.
Exactly. So it was one of the largest kingdoms in Africa. However, they didn't have any
military.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There wasn't any military army per se. And then here, so prior to the Portuguese arrival, common trades that were in Congo were, I gave a bit of a hint. So the first one. Sorry?
Iron ore.
Exactly, yeah. There's iron and, I mean ivory, sorry. So the one with the C?
Copper, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so the one with the C is copper, and the one with the R.
Oh, I'm gonna get it wrong. I know it has something to do with cloth, but I can't remember the name.
Raffia? Raffia?
Yeah, so it's raffia cloth. And then the last one, the one with the P.
Was it pottery? I don't remember.
So yeah, so the last one with the P was pottery.
Okay.
All right. So now we'll talk again about a bit of the kingdom expansion. So the Kingdom of Congo had covered parts of Angola, and that was around the 1650. And this is a closer view of the map. And as we can see, it's really like in this region right here. So here is Angola. And yeah, so now we'll talk a bit of Congo fashion. So like I had said earlier, raffia fiber or raffia cloth was often used for the clothes, and the fiber had to be combed, and the natural color of raffia was deep gold, but there were also different shades that they would use, such as red, blue, and yellow, which is primary colors. And those colors came from colorants from plants, and they also came from minerals that were found in clay. Now, another pop quiz. So this is from a bit earlier, so let's see if you remember. So what would the Kingdom of Congo melt? Was it minerals and gold, copper and gold, raffia and copper, or raffia and iron? Anyone wants to try? So yeah, it's, sorry?
Raffia and iron.
It's actually not raffia and iron, but it's copper and gold. But it's a good attempt anyways. So yeah, copper and gold. It was very common for the Kingdom of Congo to melt copper and gold. Now here, one of the things the kingdom was mostly known for, was it their music or minerals found in clay, major trading business, or their production of oil? All right. So it's their major trading business. So the Kingdom of Congo was very known for trading. And what name was designated to a king or person of authority? Was it Ra or Ya, king or emperor, Ne or Mani, or just ruler?
Money.
Babe or many?
Exactly. So it's Ne or Mani. Oh, and yeah, that actually concludes my little presentation.
Did you want to
So-
say? I know you were saying. Did you want to just say anything about the art that you were going to mention?
Well, there wasn't anything in
Oh, okay.
particular. But yeah, so my four other courses, I mean, my four other lessons, sorry, we talk about Bakongo culture, and we talk about the art in objects for Congo. We also talk about Congo before colonization, and we also talk about, oh, I forgot the last one. Oh yeah, we also talk about the riches of Congo, if I'm not wrong. I may have made a mistake, but yeah, so brief history on Congo and its kingdom. And yeah.
And that the course that you created, what levels of?
The level, it's mostly for high school students. So that's why I try to do activities that really test the attention span, because I know for high school students, most of the time they have a shorter attention span. And yeah.
Shorter than seniors?
Sorry?
Is the attention span shorter than that of seniors?
Oh, kind of actually, I would say. But every person has their own attention span. So at the end of the day, it really it can educate anyone. But yeah.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Densu.
Thank you. I just wanted to comment that I know raffia as like a fiber. Like in Jamaica, in the craft, they use it to decorate baskets or things like that. Yeah, it has that sort of strawy look. I was surprised that you referred to it as a cloth.
And it's unfortunate I couldn't find any good image for sorry, I'll just go back for the cloth being used, but yeah, it's used for many different things, but in Congo they would use it for their clothes. Yeah,
if you go in the craft market like in Kingston, the women are sitting there making their craft, while they're selling, and they would be they have these big-eyed needles threaded with raffia. And then they would be doing designs on baskets, like writing the word Jamaica or drawing something. That's my knowledge of raffia.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure I've also seen some baskets made out of raffia, and the art and the crafting behind it, it's very interesting.
Yeah. Thank you. That was very informative.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Hello, my name is Benjamin Shimoa. I'm still a high school student, and this is my second year with the Coping African Institution. And today I'm doing a presentation on Malawi. Do any of you know what Malawi is and where it is, or have you ever heard of the country? Yeah, probably not. Okay, so that's why I'm doing this presentation, because most of the time when people ask me where I'm from, I'm like, I'm from Malawi. And they're just like, I don't know where that is, right? So I took this time to start educating people about Malawi, the history, and this is just a brief introduction of my course and what it will really be all about. So this will be the course objective. We develop a formal understanding of Malawi, recount key nations, figures, and events throughout Malawi history, receive a clear of what the course will be about. So the first thing about Malawi is that it is the warm heart of Africa, right? That's what it's not about, because it's so welcoming. And when you go to Malawi, they'll treat you as their own. You will not get discriminated or pushed away, right? And that's one of the things about Malawi that makes it so special. It's like there's different cultures and they love to share with anyone. And the main nations of Malawi are these 6. The Chewa is the first one. It's the biggest population, and it's also a Bantu tribe. And we first came from the first millennium when the Bantu were migrating. And the next one is the Yao, who are very much known of this thing called Gulewankulu. It's a very secretive group, and they do rituals and a lot of things with the dead. I'll talk about this in my course. It's very interesting. There's the Tumbuka, which is also another Bantu tribe, and it really comes from Swahili. It's very similar. There's the Lomwe, who came from Mozambique because of a lot of national wars. And there's the Sena. They use other people's eyes as a charm for catching more fish in the Shears River. They are more into the fishing in the Lake Malawi, which is a very important geographical figure in Malawi. And then there's the Ngoni, who fled from Shaka Zulu in the 1891. Okay, now the geography. So Malawi is located right near Tanzania, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and about near Mozambique. It's East African. It's really small, so it's kind of hard to see where it is while it's surrounded like by big countries around it. So it's always really easy to miss it. But this is where Malawi is located. And right here is Lake Malawi, right? And one thing about Malawi, it's separated in 3 regions: the northern region, central region, and southern region. Right? In each region, there's districts, and as the capital city being Lilongwe. And one of the most important thing is the Lake Malawi, right? As you can see, there's a little border right here with Mozambique. Yeah, it's not Mozambique's water, it's still Malawi's water. They do whatever it takes to maintain the lake because it's really what they have for like tourism, fishing, because outside of from that, there's still a couple of rivers, but they do not really distribute much water. And for the history, right? So here are the key dates, right? So the first one is the Bantu arrival of the Chewa and the Tumbuka, who are really the main 2 tribes, main 2 nations of Malawi. And then it comes to the Maravi Kingdom, who is the biggest nation and kingdom in all of Malawi history. And they're also a Bantu, but they migrated from Congo all the way to Malawi. And I'll also teach about this in my course. So this, for the 4 weeks, this is really the course outline. And also talk about the slave trade of the Omani people and the Swahili who came to Malawi. They had to build a relationship, and then Malawians were betrayed by them when slave trade happened. And then there's the 1907 when the British colonized Malawi, and they called it Nyasaland. And Nyasa in Chichewa means dirty, so it referred to dirty land. Even Lake Malawi during that time was also called Lake Nyasa, right? It was always a way for British to say that we have power over you. And one of the leaders and the first president, and also the person that liberated Malawi from the British colony, his name is Hastings Banda, right? But his real name is Kamuzu Banda, but he changed it to fit the white standard and the British standard so he can get more power into making Malawi and the independence. And the state of Malawi in the 21st century. So Malawi is very reliant on its geography, right? Most of it is about agricultural, and without agricultural, it's really hard. So Malawi has been going through a lot of drought, and meaning they cannot farm or do anything. and that has really made it like one of the poorest countries in the world, and its value of like currency is really low, plus a lot of corruption from our presidents. Right, a lot of the presidents just don't run to help the country, they just run because they want power. And like one of the presidents really just ran because his brother was once president and he just wanted to fill his brother's position. And yeah, so for the last one, English influence on Chichewa, which is the main language of Malawi, is so great, right? In English, the word school, in Chichewa, we call it sikulu, right? I have tried to find the real meaning. Even if you go on any translation, go on Google Translate English Chichewa, you say school, it will give you sikulu, which is just like really bad. Like a lot of original dialogue of Chichewa has been lost throughout, right? Even Siponi, it's just one of those things that slowly, like it's been getting messed up. And thank you very much. That's my course, and you can also sign up if you want. I can give you, you can put on email and I'll reach out to you. Thank you. And if you have any questions.
Any questions for Benjamin? And if you do, you can put it in the chat. Or Daniel, did you see anything? Any hands?
I would like to ask a question, Dr. Ledbetter.
Yes.
For both of the two young people who made the presentations, I'm wondering, do they have an opportunity to do the presentation in a high school in Ottawa?
Perfect question for you, Benjamin. Go ahead. You can talk about your experience.
Yes, we do, because last year on this year on Black History Month, I was able to do a presentation for elementary school kids during Black History Month, right? I taught them about Black excellence and what it's about and how you can learn it. So we do have opportunities to teach in schools and high schools or even elementary schools.
The only other thing that I would like to say is that with people like these two young ones, the educational future seems to be in very good hands.
And we have one more. We have one more. We just need to set up numbers. Did you send me the slide? Okay, so you can start by introducing yourself and I'll set up your slides.
Hi, my name is Asma Salad. I come from Somalia. I'm a second-generation immigrant, and the high school I go to is Hillcrest High School, which is on the south part of Ottawa. And my presentation is about how Somalia came to be and the effects that happened after its civilization began.
Yeah. Technical. And what is after the original one? Okay. All right. It should be. Let me just refresh this. All right.
So
the clicker. You might want to grab the clicker behind it. Yeah, there you go.
Okay, so the civilization started around the 8th century during the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they ran the Arabians, certain Arabians, they ran because of they were aggrieved Muslims who were like, they were aggrieved, obviously, sorry. And then they ran to Somalia to seek a greater future. And at the time they were called the people of Berberi. And then, but everyone has different stories. Like I heard, for example, that I'm related to one of my clan leaders is related to the Prophet himself. Anyways, the name Somalia came from one of the great founders, apparently, and his name was Somale, which obviously turned into Somalia. And Somalia is divided into two parts of the country. There's 4 major clans who are pastoral clans, and there's agricultural clans. Pastoral means when they're more focused on like animals and farming and stuff like that. Okay. The 6 major clan families are Darod, the Dir, Rahanwain, Digil, Isaac, and Hawiya. Pastoral clans are the Dir, Darod, Hawiya, and Isaac. Agriculture clans are the Rahanwain and Digil. And then they are near the Juba and Shibil rivers. They are near the Juba and Shibil rivers because that's where all the water is. And then it's really hard to find water in Somalia because it's a hot country, obviously. So they were forced to be around those areas. And the pastoral clans chose a different lifestyle from that because of how difficult it is to get the water as well. And then, but like controversies with clans are real. I personally come from the Darod clan, and then many stories that I've heard is we're very like tight knit with our own clan, and we sort of push out anyone else. Like there's a lot of conflict between us. Okay. Somalia is a very multilingual country. It was occupied by the Ottoman Turks in Yemen, so there is different dialects, and it was colonized by Italy, Britain, and France, and that caused a great separation in our population as well. Like, yeah. Which countries affected Somalia? Egypt, Ethiopia, England, and Italy all came first. Egypt was the first one to conquer us. And then England and Italy came and tried pushing every other country out. Ethiopia claimed that Somalia was part of their land, but then England and France went to the Berlin Conference, and Ethiopia wasn't invited. So they took matters into their own hands, and then England and France agreed to split the certain territories for themselves. And Spain, England, and all these other countries were kind of fizzled out. And France, Spain, and England were the only countries that actually fought for the land. They fought in the French and Indian War. Okay. Côte Française de Somalie is what they used to call Djibouti at the time. Djibouti is this country right here. And that was occupied by France. And now one of the main languages there is French. So if you meet a Djibouti, they're 100% no French. Italy, Britain, and Ethiopia. Yeah, I already talked about this. Coast and North. Okay, so Italy and Britain, they divided the coast. So Italy, I believe, took the coast of Somalia, and then Britain took the north of Somalia. So that's how they divided their territory. and they did it by forcing out other countries. Okay, and one of the reasons why Somalia wasn't like one of the countries, the African countries that were affected by slavery was because of the distance. It was too great of a distance for the Europeans to travel to seek resources from there, and they thought it wasn't worth the resources that they would spend by constantly traveling back and forth. And one of the second reason is religion slavery. Since Somalia is a country populated, more than 99% of it are Muslims, they thought that they were too like hard-headed to even occupy because they have so much like they're not easy people to influence, and they've already been through previous griefs in the beginning of their time. Anyways, thank you for listening to my presentation. That's it.
Hey, super for how have you found the experience this summer learning about, so how much have you learned that you didn't know before?
I learned a bunch of the clan names. I only knew my own.
Yeah.
And also, I did not know. I was always wondered why they were never conquered by slavery, and I found out the reasons. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Anyone have any questions?
Any questions?
Do you understand why there are so many languages, and why there seem to be no peace between different languages?
Okay, so the reason that there were so many languages, I mean, there is only one original language, Somali, but since both, like, it was influenced by Italy and Britain, and certain parts of the country were influenced more than the others. So in the language was also colonized, and we do have some Italian in our language, and we do have French, which the Djiboutis mostly have, and we do have English words that we didn't have in Somali, so we just kept them as their original English words.
And my last question would be, do you get a feel or an understanding as to why there is so much confusion and misinformation about Somalia as it stands today?
Oh, Somalis do have a kind of complex that they're better than other people, I'll be honest, which is controversial. I don't know, because they weren't conquered by slavery. So I guess they thought that maybe that, I don't know, they were different from the other countries. And also because we originally came from the Middle East. So a lot of Somalis, some don't, they think that they're Arab, but they're not.
That's a good observation. I
have a question. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Ms. Gloria, go ahead.
Yeah, I was surprised to hear that there were so many groups, to me, because I was in Canada before the wave of Somalians, and I just see Somalians as Somalians. So I was surprised to hear there were so many groups. What I want to know, does this division carry over into, say, places like Canada or Ottawa? Like, do people stick to their groups, or is there more cohesion? Yeah.
Yes, we do.
As Somalians, or rather as your separate groups?
Yes, we do. Usually, like, for example, I've been to many clan barbecues when I was younger. And for example, the other day, my mom, she was walking home and she got tired. So she went into the car of some other Somali auntie because she found out they're from the same clan. So yes, they're very close together.
Yeah, that is something I learned today. I had no idea that there was this separation.
And that's very interesting. It goes back to that conversation we talked about earlier about identity. There's an internal identity, and then there's the external that's put on people, like blackness. Like if we walk out this room and a white person sees us, they're gonna say there's some black people. But my people are from the States and from Guinea. You're Congolese. Benjamin is from Malawi. You're Somali. And then even within Somali, for other people, you might say I'm Somali. But if you're among other Somalis, you're going to say what clan you're from. So these multiple identities, it's really interesting when we combine that with history, because I'm asking you to do a history of Somalia, but in Somalia, somebody might say, well, do a history just of your clan and teach that class. So it's interesting how all these things change. And then what are we, again, I always say, what are we doing with that? Because when we look back at recent history, when that Somali brother was killed by the police a few years ago, the entire Black community of Ottawa said, no, this is one of us. This is not about what clan he is, what Somali clan he is. It's not even the fact that he's a Somali, he's Black. So because somebody Black got killed by the police, we're all coming together and we're all going to protest this. So it's amazing how we use these identities and to pull us together when we see injustice. And I think that's an important thing to do. So that's why when we talk about African history, what we saw this morning was history that spanned different ethnic groups, different nations. We're all building because, have you ever learned about Somali history in school?
No.
No. If you have, the two of you, have you learned about Congolese or Malawi history? No. So this is the type of work that we're doing. And I'm thankful for the three of you for engaging in this work and continuing to build, because they're still continuing, they're still learning. They only did 6 weeks of this work. So, and I've been doing this work since 1994, and I'm still constantly learning. So as they're beginning to learn and grow and teach other people, we're grateful for them. I think you had I think there's a question. I saw the hand. Was that, someone had their hand up? Daniel, did the hand come up?
I've got mine up.
Oh, go ahead. Yes, sir.
I want to find that Djibouti, as far as I know, is a recent, relatively speaking, recent breakaway from Somalia. Do you know what year it became a separate country?
I think maybe in the 1970s. I don't know the exact time. But also, it also separated into Somaliland, which is the upper part of Somalia. They claimed Somaliland to be their own country.
Thank you.
Somalia, and all of these places that we mentioned today. Thank you for that. Thank all three of you, and I have digital certificates for you that I'll send to you. All of these places are extremely strategic. Somalia is one of the most strategically located places in the world. The Congo is the richest place on one of the richest territories in the world and bordered by 10 other countries. And Lake Malawi is one of the most important freshwater sources that we have on Earth. So extremely important places, contemporary and with a lot of history that we can talk about. We're gonna stop today, but next week, what we're gonna go into, we're gonna go back, we're gonna go right where we left off, because we're gonna be talking about Northeast Africa. So we're gonna be talking about Somalia, we're gonna be talking about the Horn of Africa, we're talking about Ethiopia, and the Kingdom of Aksum and its invasion of Nubia from the south. We'll talk about the emergence of Christianity in North Africa. And then in week 8, we'll talk about Islam in Africa. So we're going right back in that counterclockwise direction. So we'll stop there for today. Again, I want to thank Mr. Shimon. I call them Mr. and Mrs. because they're going to be teachers in some way. Even if they don't become teachers, they'll always know how to teach. So whatever professions they go into, they'll know how to teach. So Mr. Shimwa, Ms. Salad, Ms. Denzel, thank you again. Your incredible work. Yeah, so we're moving forward. So everyone that joined us, thank you. We're going to turn off the recording and have any discussion that folks would like to have. So thank you again.
All right. Does anyone else have any final questions? Prince, I see your question in the chat about Congo being in the same place as DRC. Yes, Congo was roughly the same territory as modern day DRC, as well as parts of northern Angola. Any other questions? All right, well, if there's no more questions, then that concludes class today. I will see you all next week. Enjoy the rest of your weekend and stay safe.